Hello. If you think ancient Egypt is a world of mysteries, grandeur, and peaceful harmony with nature, I strongly advise you to close this book right now. There's no place for grandeur here, only relentless heat, eternal bureaucracy, and a river far more likely to drown you than help you. But before you get comfortable, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is there. I'm really curious to see who has joined us. Now, settle in and make yourself comfortable. We're about to begin. You wake up before the sun rises, which is a fact that nobody in your little Nile village will ever let you forget. In this patchwork cluster of mud brick houses clinging to the eastern bank, every morning is the same. Chickens scream before dawn, donkeys complain, neighbors gossip as if sleep was a rare resource rationed by the Pharaoh himself. You are not especially important in this place, but today you have a mission that supposedly is. There is a particular way the light creeps across the Nile in the early morning, a slow, sluggish gold that sticks to the palm trees and doesn't seem to want to move on. It is already hot because it is always hot. If someone told you the concept of cool was invented by liars from distant lands, you would probably believe them. Every square cubit of the air tastes like sand and ancient sweat. The elders of your village like to remind you that the river has existed for thousands and thousands of years. They speak of the Nile as if it were a grumpy ancestor who never forgets a slight. When the river rises, they say it is angry. When it retreats, it is vengeful. You do not know how a river can hold a grudge, but you also do not ask questions. That is how people end up missing at dawn. Today, your life has changed in a way you never wished for. By some bureaucratic accident, you, yes, you, the person who has never even managed to keep your sandals tied for an entire day, have been selected to carry a message to the Pharaoh. Not just any Pharaoh. This one is said to be particularly prone to irritation, which is just as well, since your entire trip is destined to be irritating. The message is rolled tight, sealed with clay, and shoved into a pouch that smells suspiciously of onions. Nobody will tell you what it says, because nobody in your village can read. For all you know, you could be delivering a recipe for boiled fish or a list of enemies to be drowned in the river. It does not matter. The weight of history is on your shoulders, or perhaps it is just the weight of the old bread you packed for the trip. Your mother, who is already sweeping the threshold before the first light, tells you to wash in the river. The gods will see you, she says, not bothering to specify which gods or what exactly they might do if you neglect this step. So you kneel at the muddy edge, scoop up the dubious water, and hope your immune system is more resilient than the average peasant's. Water in the Nile is not really for drinking, unless you enjoy the taste of silt, crocodile droppings, and the ghosts of 10,000 generations. Still, everyone washes. It is an act of faith, or at least of habit. The ancients say the river cleanses sins. You suspect it mostly delivers skin rashes. You look up river and try to imagine how far the journey will be. The capital is a distant blur in the mind, almost 800 kilometers away, or so the elders claim. In truth, nobody you know has ever made it that far and returned. Most people in your village think the world ends at the next bend, where the fishermen tie up their battered reed boats and swap stories about how many toes they lost to snapping turtles. As you gather your meager supplies, some dry bread, a handful of dates, and the onion scented message, you can feel the villagers watching you. Some are jealous, others are relieved it is not them. All pretend this is a great honor and not a thinly veiled form of exile. This is how mornings begin in your world. The sky brightens reluctantly. The sand creeps in through every crack. The Nile, ancient and indifferent, waits for you to step aboard and try not to die before you reach the Pharaoh. You are not optimistic. Your arrival at the river's edge is met with precisely the level of enthusiasm you expect. None. The so called dock is simply a few rough hewn planks laid across the mud, creaking suspiciously beneath your sandals. The old fisherman's children are already prying off pieces of the dock to use as toys or, more likely, firewood. Nobody here has ever heard of personal property, and if they had, they would have sold it for a jug of beer by now. Waiting for you, bobbing in the shallow water like a drunk hippopotamus, is your vessel, a genuine hand tied reed boat. It is neither handsome nor sturdy. If it had ever been waterproof, that era ended before you were born. Your uncle, who insists he is an expert in traditional shipbuilding, spent 3 days braiding this pathetic raft, and now stands on the shore with his arms crossed, watching you with the grim pride of someone who knows that soon you will either drown or return to demand a refund. The construction of reed boats, you have been lectured repeatedly, is one of the oldest crafts in Egypt. In theory, the Nile's banks teem with papyrus, ready to be cut, dried, and woven into unsinkable masterpieces. In practice, the only papyrus your uncle could find was already half eaten by goats. So, your boat lists to the left, leaks to the right, and creaks in the middle. It is a wonder of ancient engineering, preserved mainly because nobody ever bothered to invent anything better for people who cannot afford wood. You step aboard. The boat rocks violently, threatening to tip you into the water before your journey even begins. There is only enough room for you, your little sack of supplies, and the weight of existential dread. The locals seem disappointed that there will not be a spectacular drowning to liven up their morning. The ancient Egyptians were masters of the river, or so you have read on broken pottery shards and heard from intoxicated elders. Their boats once carried soldiers, gods, and kings. Yours will be lucky if it carries you and your lunch for even one day. As you push away from the shore, your uncle yells after you a series of vague instructions. Keep to the middle, watch for the rocks. If you see a crocodile, pray to Sobek, and for the love of all the gods, do not come back unless you have a pharaoh's seal. As the village slips away behind you, you begin to notice the quiet. It is not peaceful exactly, more like the silence that comes just before something goes wrong. The only sounds are the slap of your paddle in the water and the faint cursing of your uncle as he realizes you took his best oar by mistake. Reed boats are, by every metric, terrible. They flex under your weight, soaking up water until the very reeds begin to sprout again. You remember being told, with great authority, that the average reed boat lasts about 1 month, or until the first hippopotamus attack, whichever comes first. The truly lucky travelers are the ones whose boats disintegrate in shallow water rather than in the crocodile infested depths. Every year, the river claims dozens of these vessels. The riverbank is littered with the sad, decaying skeletons of failed journeys, each with its own story of defeat. There is no crew. There is only you, your feeble arms, and a growing suspicion that this entire mission is some kind of elaborate practical joke. When you asked why you must row alone, you were told there are not enough young men in the village to spare, and besides, nobody else is stupid enough to volunteer for such a trip. Historically, the Egyptians sometimes sent 2 or even 3 rowers, but that luxury is for those who have more sons than sense. Even the crocodiles seem unimpressed. One enormous beast sunning itself on a rock opens a lazy eye as you paddle by, measuring the likelihood that you will provide an easy meal. Luckily for you, reed boats taste even worse than villagers. The crocodile sighs and returns to its nap. You remind yourself that Sobek, god of crocodiles and all things terrible, is supposed to protect travelers on the river. But the last time anyone in your village prayed to Sobek, it was because someone's goat had gone missing, and the goat was never found. The sun climbs higher, your back aches, your palms are already developing blisters. The ancient Egyptian boatmen, immortalized in tomb paintings, are always depicted as strong, serene, and heroic. You suspect the artists left out the part where half the crew was seasick and the other half was loudly regretting their career choices. Rowing is not the only hardship. The river teems with life, fish, birds, insects, all determined to make your journey as miserable as possible. You slap at gnats that hover around your head, a living cloud of irritation. Occasionally, you catch glimpses of silver fish darting through the water, but unless you plan to eat them raw and risk the sacred curse of intestinal misfortune, you do not bother with fishing. Your boat groans as you continue, and you try to focus on the next bend in the river. Already the village is a distant blur, swallowed by the endless horizon of reeds and sluggish water. You are alone, afloat on a river older than the gods, aboard a vessel that has no right to exist, heading toward a capital city that may as well be a myth. And you have only just begun. You finally push off from the muddy shore, your boat wobbling beneath you like a tired camel. With every stroke of your rough wooden paddle, you try to remember everything your uncle and the villagers shouted at you, mostly contradictory advice involving river spirits, mysterious eddies, and the dangers of rowing too close to either bank. Nobody, you note, ever told you what to do if your journey turned out to be monumentally boring, which it is. The great, endless river seems determined to move at the pace of a dying snail. At first, you think the Nile's current will carry you swiftly downstream all the way to the distant capital. Some say the river's flow is strong enough to sweep away entire villages, Others swear you could fall asleep and drift the length of the country without lifting a finger. The reality, as you soon discover, is far less cooperative. The river is broad, wider than you imagined, as wide as the tallest palm tree, is tall multiplied by perhaps 50, or so you estimate as the hours drag on. The current is barely more than a suggestion, a gentle tug that only occasionally nudges your boat forward. For the most part, you row and row and row. Your arms ache, your back throbs. You begin to contemplate the possibility that your bones will simply dissolve before you reach the next village, let alone the Pharaoh. Even the river seems to mock your efforts, swirling in lazy circles around the bow, trapping you in her eddies, or shoving your fragile boat sideways. You have read somewhere, well, you have heard from someone who once listened to a scribe, that the Nile's character is ever changing, its moods governed by the unseen whims of ancient gods and the more visible interference of bored bureaucrats. Once, during the season of inundation, the river would rise and swallow everything in sight, covering the black land with nutrient rich silt. The villagers called it the gift of the Nile, though it usually meant endless mud and the loss of whatever crops had not been harvested in time. This year, like every year, the elders predicted disaster, and the priests offered sacrifices to whichever deity they thought might be responsible for the weather. In the old days, it is said, a good flood meant prosperity for the whole land. A bad flood meant famine, death, and a sharp increase in the popularity of alternative gods. Now, with the river low and slow, you see the skeletons of failed harvests, abandoned fields, half buried tools, and the sad remains of a barge whose owner no doubt went looking for luck elsewhere. It is a sobering view, one that makes your own mission seem both more important and more pointless at the same time. Why would a pharaoh care about a message from a nameless village when the river itself seems so disinterested in the affairs of mortals? The Nile is full of stories. The elders in your village told you countless tales of lost travelers, phantom boats, and invisible spirits who steal away the unwary. They warned you to avoid sandbanks, where the river's surface glitters with broken dreams and the occasional fish carcass. They told you to keep an eye out for floating logs, which might be the work of mischievous gods, or more likely, the result of some drunken woodcutter upriver. Every sound, a splash, a croak, the distant wail of a water bird, feels heavy with hidden meaning. Hours pass. The sun climbs, baking your skin and turning the boat's reeds to brittle yellow sticks. Sweat trickles down your neck. You chew a date, then another, trying not to imagine how much farther you have to go. The village is long gone, nothing more than a smudge behind you. Ahead, the river stretches on and on, silent and implacable. You soon realize that the Nile is not a highway, but a living thing, capricious, stubborn, impossible to predict. Some stretches are wide and calm, others narrow and treacherous, choked with reeds or crawling with insects. Sometimes you feel the river's pull, and your boat glides forward as if pushed by invisible hands. Other times, you sit in stagnant water, spinning in lazy circles while fish mock you from below. You remember the elders' stories about the great floods of the past, when the Nile overflowed its banks and brought both life and death. They spoke of years when the river ran red with silt and blood, when crops withered and people prayed for mercy. You wonder what sort of year this is. You wonder what the Pharaoh will do with your message, if it will change anything, if it matters at all. By midday, you are sunburned, exhausted, and already questioning the wisdom of ever getting into a boat. The capital, you remind yourself, is nearly 800 kilometers away. If the river keeps up this pace, you might arrive in time for your own funeral. But you keep rowing because the alternative is drifting forever on a river that cares nothing for your mission, your village, or your life. As the day drags on you finally spot the distant shapes of another settlement on the bank, proof that you have moved, however slightly. The Nile continues to flow, indifferent and ancient. You grip your paddle, grit your teeth, and prepare for whatever comes next. There is no turning back. As the sun slowly slides toward its highest and cruelest point, you finally approach the next village along the river, a haphazard clutch of reed huts and battered boats perched on the edge of a muddy embankment. You are not greeted with open arms. In fact, the first thing you see is a group of fishermen standing on the shore, arms folded, faces suspicious. They look as though your arrival has ruined what could have been a perfectly uneventful afternoon. You maneuver your creaking reed boat closer, only to discover that you are not the only traveler attempting this route. Two other boats are tied up nearby, their owners deep in negotiations with a man who has all the appearance of someone who has never worked a day in his life, but has perfected the art of standing in the way. He is, apparently, the local toll collector. He is also a fisherman. He is also, you suspect, the closest thing to a god this village has. He greets you with a look of bored disdain and gestures for you to come closer. His robes are stained, his sandals are falling apart, but he holds himself with the haughty arrogance of someone who believes the river belongs to him. There is a fee, he says, not bothering to specify what that fee is or why you owe it. You look at your tiny pouch, already light, and realize that you are in no position to argue. He inspects your offering, a few dates, a hunk of stale bread, and your uncle's favorite fishing hook, with the air of a man who has seen it all and been disappointed every single time. Negotiating with fishermen, you quickly learn, is a battle of wits and endurance. They speak in riddles, demand payment for imaginary services, and threaten to call down the wrath of the river gods if you refuse to comply. You suspect they invented half these river gods themselves, just to justify the ever rising tolls. You wonder if, somewhere upstream, there is a fisherman collecting tolls from other fishermen, each one getting richer and richer in theory, but remaining just as muddy and hungry in practice. Fishermen are a peculiar breed in Egypt, both essential and despised. On the one hand, they provide the daily catch that keeps villages from starvation. On the other, they are infamous for their cunning, their slippery morals, and their tendency to borrow anything left unattended. You recall hearing that the great scribes of the palace once kept lists of fishermen who had been caught cheating the tax collectors. The punishment was rarely severe, usually a beating, sometimes exile, always a stern lecture about the importance of honesty before the gods. Strangely, the lists grew longer every year. In your own village, fishermen are simultaneously respected for their skill and mistrusted for their cleverness. The Nile is both their workplace and their hiding place. Nets can be used to catch fish or, just as easily, to hide a smuggled amphora of beer or a forbidden letter. It is said that during especially lean years, fishermen would fish for offerings left for the river gods, selling the idols and trinkets back to desperate priests in need of miracles. Today, the fishermen here do not seem especially hungry for miracles. They are more interested in extracting whatever small price they can from passers-by. You wonder if anyone has ever managed to negotiate passage for free. Judging by the looks of your fellow travelers, one a wide-eyed merchant with a bulging sack, the other a silent, sullen woman rowing with a broken oar, the answer is no. The toll collector pockets your payment with a satisfied grunt and waves you on, already turning his attention to the next victim. The rest of the fishermen watch you, their eyes narrowed, as if calculating how much more they could have extracted if you had been less desperate. You try not to meet their gaze. Instead, you focus on the subtle rituals of the river crossing, a muttered prayer to whatever deity is listening, a splash of water over your head, and the silent hope that the next village will be more welcoming. As you paddle away, you overhear the fishermen discussing you in low voices. They speculate on your destination, the weight of your message, and the likelihood that you will make it as far as the capital. Some say you are a fool, others that you are unlucky, but all agree that nobody ever sails the Nile without paying a price, be it in coin, dignity, or flesh. Before the village fades from sight, you catch a glimpse of their shrine to the river gods, a crude altar made of driftwood and bones, festooned with dried fish and wilting flowers. It is a reminder that on the Nile, survival is a matter of negotiation, compromise, and the occasional well-timed lie. The gods themselves, it seems, are not above accepting bribes. As the current resumes its lazy, indifferent flow, you contemplate the strange economy of the river. Everything has a price: passage, food, information, even luck. The fishermen, with their sharp eyes and sharper tongues, are both gatekeepers and tricksters, respected and reviled in equal measure. Their world is one of constant barter, endless suspicion, and the knowledge that nothing is truly free, not even the muddy water beneath your boat. You row onward, your supplies lighter and your faith in humanity somewhat diminished. Somewhere ahead, the Pharaoh waits, surrounded by his own network of collectors, bureaucrats, and priests, all of whom, you suspect, learned their trade from fishermen. Your escape from the clutches of the fishermen is short-lived. After only a few more hours of paddling, with the sun sinking ever deeper into the liquid bronze of late afternoon, you smell it, a stench so profound that it seems to crawl up from the very riverbed and wrap itself around your throat. The smell is old death, thick and putrid, cutting through even the ever present odors of fish and rot. It is the smell of a crocodile carcass rotting on the muddy shore. You drift closer, pulled by the sluggish current and a kind of horrified fascination. The crocodile lies twisted among broken reeds, its hide already turning from ancient green to a patchwork of brown and gray. Scavenger birds, mostly ibis, those priests of the animal world, pick delicately at the open wounds. Even the flies seem cautious. This, you remember, is the great Sobek's domain, god of crocodiles, lord of the unpredictable, patron of river dangers and bureaucratic headaches alike. You have been taught to fear and revere crocodiles in equal measure. In your village, no story is told without some mention of a crocodile lurking just out of sight, waiting to strike down the greedy, the lazy, or, most commonly, the merely unlucky. The priests claim that crocodiles are living avatars of Sobek, sent to test the faith and humility of mortals. Some say the river's true rulers are not kings or priests or even fishermen, but these silent armored monsters. You remember, with uncomfortable clarity, the annual rituals your village performed. The priests blessing the river, the offerings of bread and dried fish tossed into the shallows, and the whispered hope that Sobek would be merciful this year. The truly desperate sometimes tossed in a goat or a chicken, the even more desperate tossed in promises. Every now and then, you heard stories of a missing child or a vanished enemy, and everyone pretended not to notice. Not far from the carcass, you see the evidence of another ritual, rows of animal mummies, tightly wrapped and stacked like grim votive candles, half buried by the silt. Animal mummification, you have learned, is a booming industry in Egypt. Cats, ibises, baboons, and above all, crocodiles, each lovingly embalmed, wrapped in linen, and sold to pilgrims as an insurance policy against misfortune. The temples in the capital are said to overflow with these offerings. It is said that if you counted every crocodile mummy in Egypt, you would run out of numbers before you ran out of corpses. Perhaps the gods, too, are buried under mountains of broken promises. Sobek himself is a complicated god, much like the river he personifies. Sometimes depicted as a man with a crocodile's head, sometimes as a full beast. He is both protector and destroyer, bestower of fertility and harbinger of chaos. His priests are notoriously zealous, collecting donations with one hand and threats with the other. The cult of Sobek maintains grand temples in places like Crocodilopolis, where live crocodiles are pampered as sacred animals, fed daily with bread, meat, honey cakes, and, if the rumors are true, the occasional criminal. The paradox of the crocodile, both feared and worshipped, sits at the heart of Egyptian belief. Death is everywhere, but so is life. Danger is constant, but so is the possibility of salvation. The river, like Sobek, might crush you or carry you to glory, depending on its mood. You are expected to be humble, but also shrewd enough not to become a crocodile's dinner. As the light fades, you take care to keep your boat in the center of the channel, far from both the banks and any floating logs that might, in fact, not be logs at all. You have heard tales of boats overturned in an instant, of travelers pulled beneath the water, never to be seen again. You wonder, briefly, what would happen if your own bones joined the endless sediment at the bottom of the river. Would the priests bother to make you into a mummy, or would you be forgotten, just another nameless offering to the old hungry god? You find yourself muttering a half remembered prayer, part bargain, part apology. If Sobek is listening, he gives no sign. Perhaps he is too busy counting his mummies. Night creeps across the water, and you press on, the stink of death lingering in your nostrils, the memory of the crocodile's cold, indifferent stare still prickling the back of your mind. Every splash in the darkness makes you jump. Every ripple could be danger. Yet the river flows on, as it always has, sweeping the living and the dead toward the waiting sea. You row, your arms growing heavy, while the ibis finish their work behind you. The Nile, the crocodiles, the gods, all of them are ancient, all of them are hungry. You wonder, not for the first time, whose side they are really on. The next day's sun rises without enthusiasm, but it rises nonetheless, and with it comes a familiar misery: thirst. The kind of thirst that sits in your throat like a hot stone and refuses to budge no matter how many times you swallow. You watch the glimmering surface of the Nile with an expression that is equal parts hope and regret, as if you could somehow persuade the river to provide you with something remotely drinkable. This is the paradox at the heart of Egyptian civilization. Here you are, drifting on the world's most celebrated river, worshipped, feared, chronicled in song and stele, and yet to drink from it is to invite an assortment of illnesses, each with their own poetic name and deadly efficiency. The wise say the Nile brings life. The wiser know it brings diarrhea, and worse. If you have ever doubted the ingenuity of the ancients, remember this: they spent millennia living beside water, yet invented every possible method to avoid actually swallowing it. You recall the desperate wisdom of the village elders. Always strain the river water through linen, if you have any. Boil it if you can find firewood, or, preferably, mix it with barley and ferment it until it is no longer recognizable as water at all. Beer, the cloudy, grainy, barely intoxicating staple of every Egyptian diet, is less a luxury and more a strategy for survival. Even the poorest laborers, hauling stone under a sun that never seems to set, are granted their daily quota of bread and beer. It is a measure of the river's duplicity that the safest way to drink it is to let it rot first. You dig into your supplies hoping to find something, anything, that will make the day more bearable. You packed a little bread, now turning to rock, and a few dates, now turning to syrup. You did not pack beer. You were not trusted with beer. Too valuable for a messenger, your mother said, as she pressed the message into your hands and muttered her favorite curse at the sand. But she did pack a small, leaky jar of some other beverage, a bitter, sour concoction flavored with whatever roots happened to be closest at hand that morning. You drink it in tiny sips, imagining it is the sweet, frothy beer served in the temples to the gods themselves. It is not. The Egyptian fascination with beer is something no historian can quite overstate. Entire festivals are built around the stuff. Gods demand it as an offering. Even the great scribes, hunched over their endless scrolls, are rumored to keep a hidden stash beneath their ink pots. Beer is not just a drink, it is currency, medicine, a tool of diplomacy, and occasionally a weapon. There are stories, mostly told by the drunk and the vengeful, of neighbors settling old disputes by brewing particularly foul batches. You daydream, delirious with thirst, of the famous temple breweries in the capital. Some say the Pharaoh's own staff drink nothing else, and that the priests maintain vast underground cellars to ensure the gods are always properly supplied. It is said that one of the old queens once ordered her tomb painted not with scenes of battle or harvest, but with images of her favorite brewing recipes. In Egypt, immortality may be reserved for the mighty, but everyone hopes for a good drink in the afterlife. Yet here you are, dipping a cupped hand into the river, staring at the brownish water swirling with silt, the traces of last night's storms, and the occasional, unidentifiable thing floating by. You hesitate. The boat creaks. Somewhere nearby, an invisible bird cackles as if in warning. You sip reluctantly and taste all the ancient curses of Egypt at once: sand, fish, decay, the memory of crocodiles. You spit, cursing, and vow not to do that again. Somewhere along the bank, you see a small group of women washing clothes, their laughter drifting over the water. You envy them their buckets and their certainty. For them, the river is a tool, a friend, a hazard to be managed. For you, it is an adversary, one that has yet to reveal all its tricks. The sun continues to rise. The thirst remains. You chew the hard bread, grateful at least for the illusion of fullness it provides. The dates are almost gone. The strange, sour drink in your jar is nearly finished. You consider your options and come to the only logical conclusion. You will need to find a village soon, or risk becoming one more cautionary tale told by the fisherman, another fool who underestimated the Nile. For now, you paddle on, each stroke heavier than the last. The river glitters mockingly, offering you endless water that you cannot truly use. Your thoughts grow fuzzy, half dream, half memory. You remember a story: the great Pharaoh who challenged the gods to make the Nile flow backwards, only to discover that some things cannot be bargained for, not even by kings. By late afternoon, your lips are cracked, your head swims, and your patience is gone. In the endless, shimmering heat, it is easy to believe that the river is laughing at you, just a little. The ancients were right about one thing: nothing here is ever truly free, least of all a simple drink of water. By the time the sun finally disappears, melting into a distant haze behind the reeds, you are exhausted in a way that has nothing to do with rowing. It is the exhaustion of existing. Sore, parched, and anxious, your thoughts slowed by the heat and the endless threat of things that slither, crawl, or bite. As the last streaks of orange fade from the sky, you make the grim decision to bring your boat to shore. The Nile at night is not a place for the living, or, as local wisdom goes, for anyone who values keeping all their limbs attached. There is a peculiar silence after sunset. Even the frogs fall quiet for a moment, as if waiting to see which of the river's creatures will speak first. The darkness is not a soft blanket, but a living thing, thick, sticky, heavy. You see in almost nothing and hear far too much. The whisper of the wind through papyrus, the rustle of reeds, the splash of something large or something hungry in the water a few paces away. Egyptian nights are famously deceptive. In stories, the river is always a place of life and abundance. In reality, every shadow holds a potential predator, and every lull in the chorus of insects is a sign that something larger is moving nearby. Ancient scribes, never known for their optimism, devoted long passages to the hazards of travel after sunset. Only fools, thieves, and the recently deceased tempt the river at night, they wrote, though sometimes it is hard to tell those categories apart. You pull your boat up onto a patch of muddy bank and tie it loosely to a tree root, praying that it will still be there come morning. The act of tying knots feels like a ritual, a small defense against chaos. You gather your pitiful supplies and find a place to sit, huddled in your thin cloak, trying to become as unremarkable as a lump of clay. The world of the Nile after dark is ruled by creatures that want nothing to do with you and yet would not hesitate to end your story if you became too careless. The snakes are a particular terror, revered and feared in equal measure. Your childhood was filled with stories of the great serpent god Apep, the bringer of darkness and chaos, said to rise from the depths of the underworld each night to battle the sun. There are lesser snakes, too, all venom and hunger, slipping silently through the reeds. The old cure for a snake bite, you recall, involves a mix of prayer, mud, and whatever the healer's imagination can conjure. Most of those bitten simply did not make it home. Insects, too, dominate the night. Mosquitoes swarm as soon as the light fades, their numbers uncountable, their bites both irritating and, often, deadly. The fever comes from them, malaria in the modern tongue, but in Egypt it is simply called the curse. The clever wrap themselves in cloth, but the Nile's mosquitoes are cleverer still. You slap and scratch, knowing your blood is their only supper. Occasionally, you hear jackals in the distance, their wails echoing across the black water. The ancient Egyptians respected jackals enough to make one into a god, Anubis, guardian of the dead. There is an old comfort in knowing that even monsters are sometimes promoted to divinity, though that comfort is small as you listen to the unearthly cries and imagine all the bones scattered in the reeds. But the greatest fear comes from what you cannot see. Every sound is magnified. A splash becomes a crocodile, a rustle becomes a thief. You remember all the advice you were given. Never sleep on the shore, never build a fire to attract attention, never, under any circumstances, wander into the tall grass. The darkness is not empty, it is full to bursting. There are, of course, those who ignore these warnings. River smugglers, whose cargo is always more dangerous than they admit. travel at night to avoid patrols. Superstitious pilgrims, convinced that the gods will watch over them, make midnight offerings to the water. And then there are the outcasts, thieves, fugitives, the newly widowed, and the plain unlucky. They slip through the darkness like fish, never sure if the next bend will bring salvation or doom. You try not to sleep, though exhaustion pulls at your eyelids. Instead, you listen, hoping that you will hear danger before it hears you. Somewhere far downriver, an owl hoots. The wind shifts, bringing with it the smell of damp earth, old fish, and distant flowers. You think of home, of your mother's words. Night is for the gods, not for fools. You hope she was wrong, but the Nile is not in the habit of proving mothers wrong. Hours pass, each one slower than the last. Your mind wanders, drifting between wakefulness and dream. You imagine the river as a serpent, coiling and uncoiling, swallowing the moon and spitting it out again each morning. In your dream, the water rises and pulls you down, where pale hands reach up from the mud and tug you toward the underworld. You wake with a start, heart pounding, mouth dry. Somehow, miraculously, you survive the night. The sky softens from black to gray, and the first tentative sounds of birdsong return. You count your limbs, your supplies, and your blessings. Against all odds, your boat is still where you left it. You have not been eaten, bitten, robbed, or cursed. You have passed one more trial on your journey, a small victory in a land that measures life in such increments. As dawn brightens the river, you untie your boat and push off, carrying the memory of the night with you. The river may be ancient, but its lessons are always new. The Nile never sleeps, and neither, it seems, should you. You are not far from the bank, still shaking off the lingering tension of a sleepless night, when you see a procession gliding down the river ahead, a fleet of boats moving in disciplined, if somewhat chaotic, formation. The first boat is large, its prow carved into the shape of a falcon's head, and is covered with a garish awning of embroidered linen. Behind it come smaller boats, each one loaded with cargo, baskets, jars, what looks suspiciously like a barrel of beer, and, of course, the priests. The priests are easy to spot. They stand in their spotless linen robes, sweating profusely under the morning sun, clutching gilded poles and waving at anyone on shore with the air of men accustomed to respect, if not necessarily to comfort. The central boat is carrying something precious, a statue of a god wrapped in silk, balanced on an altar of painted wood and gold. The god is unblinking, heavy, and, from a distance, vaguely bored. You paddle closer, compelled by equal parts curiosity and dread. The priests do not seem pleased to see you, a solitary figure in a leaky reed boat. They shout warnings that are more theatrical than menacing, invoking the name of every river deity who might have jurisdiction here. You wave back in what you hope is a respectful gesture and try not to make eye contact with the god. The last thing you need is divine attention. Priestly processions are not uncommon along the Nile. If you believed the stories, the gods themselves are more traveled than most peasants. Every season, Statues are loaded onto ceremonial barges, paraded from one temple to the next, and displayed for the adoration, or at least the compliance, of the populace. Each journey is a logistical nightmare. The priests, obsessed with ritual purity, bring with them a legion of assistants, porters, and, inevitably, someone whose only job is to keep the god's face dust free. It is said that to move a statue the size of a goat requires no fewer than 7 grown men, 3 weeks of planning, and a cartographer with questionable eyesight. You marvel at the scale of this operation. There are at least 20 men, two sacred cows, 4 heavily burdened donkeys, and a scribe feverishly jotting notes on a fragment of pottery. The priests bark orders, argue over route choices, and complain loudly about the lack of suitable shade. The riverbank is crowded with curious villagers, hoping for a blessing, or failing that, a leftover offering. It is all very grand and, at the same time, deeply ridiculous. There is a certain irony in the priest's obsession with detail. Every step of the journey is prescribed by tradition, which songs to sing, which direction to face, even how many times to splash the holy water on the prow. 3, never 4. Nobody can remember why. The entire affair is half sacred, half bureaucratic. The gods demand nothing less than perfection, but the priests themselves, burdened with heat, hunger, and their own self importance, rarely deliver it. Somewhere in the confusion, someone always forgets something, usually the jar of honey cakes promised as an offering, or the list of acceptable blessings to recite at each stop. If you linger too close, you risk being recruited into the procession's endless chain of labor. It is an old trick of the priesthood, impressing passing travelers into service under the pretext of earning the god's favor. You are careful to keep your distance, nodding and murmuring polite nothings as the flotilla moves past. The priests, relieved to see you are not a thief or a competitor for their god's attention, allow you to pass unmolested. As you drift behind them, you observe their rituals with a mixture of awe and skepticism. The statue is periodically unwrapped, displayed for a moment, then reverently recovered as if to spare it the indignity of seeing the world. Each village the priests pass offers gifts: bread, beer, dates, dried fish, most of which are quickly consumed by the priests themselves, with token portions left at the god's feet. The god, as far as you can tell, remains impassive, unmoved by both the devotion and the bickering. It is said that moving the gods around the land is essential to keeping the cosmic order intact. If the gods do not see the river, it will dry up. If they do not visit the people, famine will follow. If the priests do not collect enough offerings, the gods will become irritable. The priests, therefore, are part religious leaders, part logisticians, and mostly professional warriors. The fate of Egypt, they insist, rests on their narrow, sunburned shoulders. You can imagine what happens when the priests are not satisfied with the arrangements. Curses, endless complaints to the local governors, maybe even a demand for a new batch of worshippers. The gods, after all, must never be seen to travel in discomfort, even if their porters are one strong gust away from mutiny. As the procession fades from sight, you realize that the priests, with all their pomp and panic, are simply another kind of river traveler, chasing approval, avoiding disaster, hoping to reach their destination with their dignity, if not their faith, intact. The gods, for their part, seem content to let mortals do all the rowing. You continue on, quietly relieved not to have been pressed into holy service. The sun rises higher, and the river resumes its slow, indifferent course. The priests and their statues disappear around a bend, taking their blessings and their curses with them. Just as you think you have slipped past the priests and their godly logistics for good, your boat gives a sound, a wet, plaintive creak, as though the river itself is laughing at your hubris. Then, inevitably, a cold wetness creeps up your left foot. You look down to discover a slow but steady trickle seeping through the cracked bottom of your reed boat. The Nile is always eager to reclaim what is hers, and you have just been reminded of the frailty of ancient engineering. Reluctantly, you paddle to the nearest patch of bank, half hidden by towering papyrus and watched over by a dozen ibis, those solemn, long-beaked priests of the river who stand on one leg and judge everyone. The ibises watch you with the curiosity of minor bureaucrats, interested only if your misfortune might result in a meal. As you drag your boat onto the mud, you realize you have joined a long tradition of Egyptian travelers stranded and cursing the Nile's indifference. Repairing a reed boat is an exercise in futility and faith. In theory, every Egyptian knows how to do it. You simply find more reeds, wedge them into the gaps, and hope the gods are feeling generous. In practice, the available reeds are too short, too dry, or already claimed by the river's insect population. You rummage through the banks, searching for something that might serve as a makeshift patch, all the while aware of the ibises inching closer, hoping to steal your lunch, or perhaps your soul. You remember your uncle's lessons, delivered with the absolute certainty of a man who never once rode beyond sight of his own house. Always carry spare reeds, he'd say, and tie your knots so that even the river cannot untangle them. Naturally, you did neither. You have only the tattered length of rope you use to tie your boat at night and a broken sandal strap, which, in a moment of desperate innovation, you weave into the boat's side. It is not elegant, but then neither is survival. The process is slow, awkward, and muddy. Your hands are soon raw, scratched by papyrus, and bitten by invisible bugs. The ibises edge closer, their black eyes unblinking. There is an old superstition that the ibis is a bird of wisdom, beloved of Thoth, the god of scribes. The priests claim that to be watched by an ibis brings luck, though whether it is good or bad depends on the bird's mood. To me, the ibises seem indifferent, merely waiting to see if your patch will hold or if they will have fresh entertainment when you sink. While you struggle, you think about the countless travelers who must have faced the same predicament. The Nile is littered with the remnants of failed boats, skeletal frameworks of once ambitious vessels, abandoned when hope ran out or when the crocodiles grew too bold. The Pharaoh's own navy, so legend says, is not above a little hasty riverbank maintenance. Even the gods' barges, for all their gold and incense, have been seen pulled onto shore for repairs, while a dozen sweating laborers curse quietly and try to look devout. You eventually manage a crude patch. You tie the reeds in place with your remaining rope, muttering the sorts of prayers that would get you thrown out of any respectable temple. You test the repair with the caution of a man who has already survived too many near disasters. The boat still leaks, but a little less. This, you decide, is a victory by the standards of the Nile. As you catch your breath, you notice that the ibises have begun to argue among themselves, stabbing at each other with their beaks over a fragment of your bread. The spectacle is both comical and vaguely ominous. You wonder if Thoth, god of wisdom, watches all his birds with the same weary patience as they squabble over crumbs. It occurs to you that perhaps wisdom in Egypt is not about knowledge, but about persistence, about surviving, improvising, and never quite giving up, no matter how unpromising your materials. Once the patch seems secure, you slip the boat back into the water and offer a final mocking bow to your audience of birds. One of them croaks, unimpressed. The Nile receives you again, leaking but afloat, and you push off back into the uncertain current. You row with a bit more care now, mindful of every wobble and groan from the hull. The sun climbs higher, the air thickens, and you realize you are covered in mud, sweat, and possibly the blessing or the curse of the ibis. Your repairs, like all things on the Nile, are temporary, but for now, they are enough. As the reeds and their feathered custodians recede behind you, you are left with the peculiar satisfaction of having solved one problem, even as 1,000 others wait around the next bend. This, you reflect, is the real journey, not simply reaching the Pharaoh, but surviving the endless, inventive trials the river throws in your path. You have not rowed far before you encounter the next ordeal, this time not a beast or a break, but the far more dangerous species known as the river patrol. A flash of sun on copper, a lazy ripple in the current, and then you see them, a sleek wooden boat, longer and cleaner than anything you have ever touched, bristling with men whose only job, apparently, is to look for trouble and pretend they are the answer to it. The soldiers are unmistakable. Even from a distance, you can see the gleam of their armor, the red sashes at their waists, and the broad, bored expressions of men who have spent too many days in the sun and not enough at the temple. They row with the casual arrogance of people who have never patched a reed boat or argued with a toll collector. These are the Pharaoh's men, and the river belongs to them. Or so they insist, loudly and often. You consider fleeing to the reeds, but you know better. The river patrol has eyes sharper than a crocodile's, and patience even longer. Besides, there are stories, always whispered, never written, about what happens to people who run from the patrol. The lucky ones pay a fine and spend a day in the sun as an example to others. The unlucky ones simply vanish, and their relatives learn the art of silence. The patrol pulls up alongside you with impressive synchronization. The captain, A man whose face has been carved by years of shouting leans over and demands your business. There is a ritual to these encounters, a dance older than any hymn. You answer respectfully, voice trembling just enough to show humility, but not so much as to suggest guilt. You mention your village, your message for the Pharaoh, and the trials you have endured. You do not mention the fisherman's toll, the lost bread, or the leaking boat. Some things are better left unsaid. The captain sniffs as if trying to detect a lie, or perhaps just an excuse to fine you. He asks for your permit. You produce the only thing resembling official parchment, a crumpled letter, sealed in faded clay, and so liberally smudged that it could pass for a shopping list or a death warrant. He inspects it with the air of a man who cannot read, but enjoys the idea of reading. At length, he grunts and nods to his men. You are not free yet. The soldiers clamber aboard your boat, boots trampling the last shreds of dignity from your makeshift patch. They poke, prod, and comment on the state of your supplies. They ask if you are carrying contraband, beer, salt, forbidden scrolls, runaway lovers. You reply in the negative to everything, careful to sound neither too quick nor too slow. The art of survival, you realize, is mostly the art of sounding boring enough to be forgotten. Ancient Egyptian soldiers on river patrols had a reputation for corruption that was almost as impressive as their capacity for boredom. The stories your uncle told included long lists of fines for everything from improper knots to unlicensed prayer. Whole villages have been bankrupted by the wrong answer to a trick question. Yet, for all their power, these men are as much prisoners of the river as you are. They drift endlessly between stations, neither here nor there, living on the edge of someone else's authority. Today, fortune is with you. The soldiers, finding nothing worth stealing and no excuse for arrest, lose interest. The captain, not wanting to waste daylight on a nobody, returns your letter and waves you on. You breathe a silent sigh of relief as the patrol boat peels away, its crew already arguing about who will row next. You are left in their wake, shaken but whole. Your boat, miraculously, is still afloat, though a new collection of muddy boot prints now adorns the deck. You push off, grateful for the first time that you are a nobody. On the Nile, it seems, anonymity is the only true armor. As you row away, you reflect on the river's strange hierarchy. The patrols claim authority, but are ruled by boredom. The priests claim holiness, but are ruled by logistics. The fishermen claim the water, but are ruled by hunger. And you claim nothing, and perhaps that is why you continue to drift, still moving, still ignored, still alive. The river flows on, carrying secrets, bribes, and broken dreams downstream. You watch the patrol disappear around a bend and wonder how many travelers have vanished in their shadow, erased not by violence, but by the slow, grinding machinery of bureaucracy. On this river, you learn quickly survival is not about strength or wit, but about knowing when to speak, when to listen, and when to let the current carry you past those who think they own it. As the sun crawls ever higher, Burning off the last of the morning mist, you spot a cluster of boats gathered along a wider bend of the Nile. It is a floating market, a temporary anarchic parliament of traders, hucksters, and opportunists, all presided over by the gods of commerce and luck, neither of whom are known for their generosity. The boats are stacked with every conceivable good: bundles of linen, jars of honey, bags of salt, bolts of rough wool, half rotten fish, and most precious of all, small casks of beer. Flies hover over everything, their enthusiasm undampened by the traders' constant swatting. The air is thick with shouting, laughter, and the sharp tang of deals being made and remade. You hesitate at the edge of this madness, wary of getting tangled in disputes. But hunger gnaws at you, and your supplies are pitiful, so you sidle closer, boat bumping against the others in a slow, muddy dance. Almost at once, you are descended upon by traders: a woman with arms like a wrestler, a boy missing several teeth, an old man who introduces himself as General of Beans, though his uniform appears to be held together by wishful thinking. Ancient Egypt was a nation of traders as much as farmers or priests. The Nile was not just a river, but a marketplace, a place where fortunes were made and lost, often in the space of a single insult or a poorly chosen proverb. You quickly discover that everyone here is an expert in the art of persuasion, and that every item's price is a matter of both negotiation and theater. Your handful of dates, a scrap of linen, and your uncle's battered fish hook, recovered from the toll collector with some effort, are your only bargaining chips. The first thing you learn is that there are no fixed prices. Each trader insists that their wares are both rare and essential. Only the gods themselves taste honey this pure, crows one man, offering a jar that has already attracted a squadron of ants. Linen spun by blind virgins, claims another, holding up a ragged cloth you suspect has already served as a fish wrapper. There are accusations, counter accusations, elaborate displays of wounded pride, and, in one case, an impromptu poem about the virtues of onions. Every deal is an exercise in performance. You must act shocked by the first price, insulted by the second, deeply suspicious by the third, and finally, if all goes well, willing to settle for a fourth that is only moderately ruinous. If you overplay your skepticism, the seller will accuse you of insulting their ancestors. If you underplay it, you will be charged triple for your ignorance. The rules are as old as the river, and the punishments as inevitable. There are stories, of course, famous tales of cunning merchants who tricked the mighty. One merchant once convinced a minor official that his sack of onions was actually a magical cure for baldness. Another managed to sell the same bolt of linen 3 times before the buyers realized it was mostly holes. Even the great pharaohs are rumored to have been fooled by traders, lured into purchasing sacred relics that turned out to be clever imitations carved from driftwood and painted gold. As you barter, you realize that the true masters of this market are the ones who can lie with the straightest faces. There is an unwritten code. Never show how much you want something. Never reveal how little you have left. and always leave yourself an escape route, ideally one that leads past a distracted guard and a pile of unattended dates. Despite your best efforts, your haul is modest. A new, slightly sturdier paddle, allegedly used by a hero of legend, though you suspect the legend is recent. A crust of bread, and a lump of salty cheese that smells like it was made by the river. Itself, the beer, sadly, is beyond your budget. You consider offering to carry a message or row a boat in exchange, but the traders only laugh. Everyone here has a story to sell, and nobody wants another one. As the market breaks up, you watch the boats drift apart, each carrying away its secrets, squabbles, and little victories. The traders gossip and joke, already plotting their next deals. You are left with the impression that for all their competition, there is a strange fellowship here, rivalries that fade with the current, old enmities replaced by new alliances as the river dictates. You push away from the shore, chewing your prize, the taste as bitter as it is filling. In the distance, you hear a pair of traders arguing over the price of dried fish, each accusing the other of being descended from jackals. It is a reminder that, on the Nile, everyone is both a hunter and the hunted, a buyer and a seller, a mark and a trickster. As you row on, you reflect that the Nile's true wealth is not gold or grain or beer, but the endless comedy of people trying to outwit one another. The gods may own the land, the Pharaoh may rule the people, but the river belongs, always, to those who can bargain longest and laugh last. The market is long behind you when you find yourself fighting against a sudden wind, paddling furiously just to keep from spinning in circles. The sun is dipping lower, and you search desperately for a place to land before darkness falls. That is when you see it, a small, low island of mud and reeds, barely more than a smear in the water, but offering just enough dry land for a weary traveler and a boat with questionable repairs. You make for it, grateful for anything solid underfoot, and drag your leaking reed boat up onto the muddy bank. The instant you set foot on the island, you are surrounded by birds. They are everywhere, on every branch, every stone, every patch of open ground. There are herons, storks, ibises, and gulls, each species claiming a piece of the chaos, each louder and more opinionated than the last. It is not a peaceful scene. The air is filled with shrieks, squawks, and the constant flap of wings. It is less a sanctuary and more a feathery parliament, arguing about territory and fish guts. You settle down with what remains of your bread and cheese, keeping one eye on the more aggressive gulls, who seem to believe that everything edible belongs to them by divine right. As you eat, you recall the many ways birds have ruled the Egyptian imagination. In your village, it is said that birds are the souls of the dead, come back to check on their descendants, or just as often, to cause mischief. The ibis is sacred to Thoth, the god of writing and wisdom, and anyone who harms an ibis is doomed to write letters for eternity in the afterlife. The falcon is the symbol of Horus, lord of the sky, while vultures are the guardians of royalty, a fact that has never made the sight of a vulture any less unsettling. The cult of birds in Egypt is more than just symbolism. Temples raise entire flocks as living offerings. Priests collect eggs for use in mysterious rituals, and the markets sell bird mummies alongside their feline and canine cousins. Some years, it seems the capital is more feathers than stone. You remember hearing of a festival in Memphis where 1,000 doves were released at sunrise, an impressive spectacle marred only by the need to clean the statues afterward. Birds, too, have a more practical use. The peasants use their droppings to fertilize fields. Hunters snare them for food, and the cleverest villagers use trained kites to frighten away locust swarms. Yet, for all their usefulness, birds are rarely loved. They are too loud, too greedy, too unpredictable. In the stories of your childhood, birds are always tricksters, stealing from the gods, outsmarting the priests, and generally making life more complicated for everyone. There is a saying among your people: only a fool tries to bargain with a bird. On this island, the fool is you. A flock of herons circles warily, eyeing your bread. You attempt to stare them down, but they are unmoved. You toss a crumb as a peace offering. Instantly, a mob of gulls descends, fighting with such ferocity that you fear for your fingers. The herons watch, unimpressed, then return to their dignified foraging. The ibises, as always, stand apart, ignoring both you and the chaos, content to stab at the mud for frogs and insects. The sun sets quickly. As darkness spreads, the birds quiet, settling onto their perches, tucking their heads beneath their wings. You lie back on the muddy ground, surrounded by the gentle rustle of feathers and the last murmurs of the day. There is something almost holy in the moment, a reminder that, for all its perils and absurdities, the Nile is home to more life than any pharaoh could command. Yet, the peace is uneasy. You know the stories of the Bird Islands, places considered both lucky and cursed. Some travelers swear they heard voices in the bird calls, warnings, or prophecies. Others say that to sleep among the birds is to invite dreams of the dead. As you drift off, you wonder if the souls of your ancestors are among them, or if they have better things to do in the afterlife. You doze fitfully, woken now and then by a screech or the soft plop of bird droppings dangerously close to your head. Each time you check your supplies and your boat, nothing has been stolen, at least not by anything with hands. It is a small mercy. By morning, the island is alive with motion. Birds rise in waves, filling the sky with frantic energy. You push your boat bus into the river, feathers sticking to your tunic and mud caked to your feet. The island fades behind you, but the chorus of bird song follows you for miles. You paddle on, now half believing that you are being watched and judged by a parliament of beaks and wings. On the Nile, even a night's shelter comes at a price, a lesson in humility, a brush with superstition, and the lingering suspicion that you will never be free of feathers. The island of birds vanishes behind you, leaving nothing but the echo of screeches and a few persistent feathers lodged in your tunic. The river is quiet, the sky hazy, and for the first time since you left your village, you let yourself consider the object that set this whole journey in motion, the message to the Pharaoh. It sits at the bottom of your sack, wrapped in waxy linen and sealed with the thumbprint of your village headman, a man who could barely sign his own name, let alone compose a letter to a king. You imagine the parchment inside, filled with careful pictograms, and maybe a line or two in the crooked, desperate hand of the only person in the village who could claim to be a scribe. You are not sure if you hope the letter will be read or quietly ignored. The power of writing in Egypt is not to be underestimated. In a land where most people will never learn more than a handful of symbols, the scribe is both wizard and gatekeeper. Your journey, for all its absurdity, is part of a tradition stretching back centuries, a tradition in which a message is as likely to doom a village as to save it. The message you carry could be anything: a plea for relief, a complaint against a neighbor, a request for an impossible favor, or worst of all, a confession meant for the Pharaoh's ears alone. You have heard the stories. In the time of your great grandparents, a messenger brought a letter to the capital only to have it returned unopened, stamped with a single red mark, a mark that meant ignored, or, according to the superstitious, cursed. Another time, the Pharaoh's own scribe demanded that every village submit a copy of its harvest records. The village elders, unable to write, paid a traveling scribe in bread and beer to invent the numbers. The punishment, when discovered, was swift and memorable. You wonder sometimes whether the village ever recovered. Scribes themselves are a peculiar breed, both revered and quietly resented. To become a scribe requires years of schooling, endless copying of religious texts, and a talent for surviving the boredom of bureaucracy. The best are adopted by powerful patrons. The worst become schoolmasters, or even more ignobly, itinerant letter writers, offering their services at the market for a handful of dates or a stale heel of bread. In the capital, the scribes rule their dusty corner of society with sharp eyes and sharper tongues, holding the keys to everything that matters: land, law, and even the afterlife. Mistakes are not tolerated. An error in a contract could mean the loss of a field. A missed mark in a tax record could bring down the wrath of officials, and a smudged line in a letter to the Pharaoh, well, nobody talks about what happens then. Punishments range from fines and beatings to, in rare and memorable cases, exile. Sometimes, just for good measure, the scribe's family would be invited to work on the king's next monument. As you drift, you worry about your letter. Was it written correctly? Was the spelling perfect? Did the scribe use the right form of address, one humble enough to avoid offense, but not so humble as to appear pathetic? You think of all the ways a message might go wrong: a misspelled name, a misunderstood metaphor, a seal broken by accident. The Pharaoh is said to receive dozens of letters each day, most of which never reach his eyes. They are sorted, summarized, sometimes simply discarded by bored officials who know that the fate of a village means nothing compared to the fate of the treasury. The anxiety settles in your stomach. What if, After all this effort, your letter ends up in a pile of to be ignored, or worse, becomes the subject of ridicule in a scribe's private jokes. There are stories, always whispered in the shade, of villages destroyed because a scribe was having a bad day. Yet, there is a certain hope, too. The written word is power. A well placed petition can move mountains, or at least shift a tax burden. A clever scribe can win land for his family with a stroke of the reed pen. A message, properly composed, might save a village from disaster or win mercy where none was expected. The dream of every poor Egyptian is that one day the Pharaoh will read their plea and, in a fit of royal generosity, send a wagon load of grain, or at least a sympathetic reply. You hold your letter a little tighter as you paddle on. The river narrows, the current quickens, and every bend seems to bring a new anxiety. The capital is still far away, but the possibility of failure grows closer with every stroke. The Nile, for all its mystery, cannot answer your questions. Only the silent, distant scribes, perched in their cool halls, can decide the fate written in your message. As the sun sets, you whisper a prayer, not to the river gods or even to the Pharaoh, but to the invisible army of scribes whose hands decide everything and whose errors, unlike yours, are never forgiven. Morning arrives as usual, with too much light and not enough hope. The sky is a harsh, bleached white. You wake with aches in your arms, mud on your tunic, and the letter to the Pharaoh burning a hole in your thoughts. Today, the river is restless. The current runs faster, churning up silt from the depths. But it is the wind that worries you most. You push off, grateful for the rare moment when the Nile seems willing to carry you, but quickly realize the river has handed you over to a new enemy. A gust comes barreling downstream, slapping your little reed boat sideways, almost tossing you into the water. You dig your paddle deep and curse the gods, quietly, for the wind has its spies. The wind here is a creature all its own, invisible but vindictive, promising help one moment and disaster the next. Ancient Egyptians both revered and resented the wind. Their poets wrote odes to the gentle northern breezes that brought cool relief from the desert, but every sailor knew the terror of sudden gusts from the east. It was the north wind, the god of which was often shown as a man with blue skin and a lion's head, that allowed boats to sail upstream against the Nile's current. The south wind, however, was said to be the breath of angry spirits sent to punish the foolish, the lazy, or the unlucky. You wonder which group you now belong to. This is your first encounter with the problem of sails. Your uncle, ever the optimist, tied a rectangle of linen to a stick and insisted it would help. Just raise it when the wind is with you, he said, as if the wind ever listened to peasants. Today, the wind is not with you. It is against you. You raise the sail anyway, hoping for a miracle. Instead, the sail snaps, flails, and threatens to drag your entire boat backward. You fight it down, nearly losing your paddle and what little dignity you have left. The Egyptians' relationship with wind power was a study in frustration and improvisation. The Pharaoh's great barges boasted enormous, painted sails, crewed by teams of professionals who spent their lives learning when to use wind and when to rely on muscle. The common man, meaning you, made do with patched linen, fraying cords, and luck. There is a famous saying in your village: if you want the wind's help, pay in advance. No one knows what the wind does with its payment, but it never seems satisfied. As your boat swings awkwardly from side to side, you remember stories told by the oldest villagers. Some claim the wind is full of restless ghosts, the souls of those drowned in the river, now fated to torment the living. Others swear that certain words, shouted at the right time, can summon a friendly gust or drive away a storm. The priests, for their part, blame everything on the laziness of mortals. If the wind hinders you, it is a sign you have neglected your offerings. If true, you must owe the gods a small fortune by now. You try everything: paddling, steering with your feet, even pleading quietly with the sky. The wind answers with a sudden shift, filling your sail for half a heartbeat before dumping you into a patch of reeds. You spend the next hour untangling yourself and your boat, the laughter of invisible spirits echoing in your ears. In moments like these, you remember that the Nile is not a road, but an adversary, one with infinite patience and a dark sense of humor. The professional river navigators, the so-called lords of the current, were rumored to carry secret charms and spells to appease both river and wind. Some painted eyes on their sails, hoping to trick the gods into looking elsewhere. Others wore amulets or smeared their faces with mud before every journey. You have none of these things, only a half-broken boat, a battered paddle, and the burning certainty that whatever forces rule the river have very little interest in your welfare. Yet, you persist, not because you are brave, but because there is no alternative. The wind will not pity you. The river will not turn back. Every stroke is an act of defiance, and every curse you mutter into the breeze is one more reminder that for all the myths and miracles, the world is run by chance and bad weather. By midday, the wind drops as suddenly as it came. Your arms ache, your back is sore, and your mouth is full of river water and curses. The sail hangs limp, a flag of surrender. You collapse at the bottom of the boat, exhausted, and let the current carry you for a while. You watch the sky for signs, but see only a falcon circling high above, perhaps Horus, perhaps just a hungry bird. As you drift, you think about all those who sailed before you: kings, priests, traders, thieves, all of them battered by the same winds, all of them cursed and blessed in equal measure. The river, you realize, will forget you, just as it has forgotten everyone else. But the wind, always restless, always fickle, will remember, if only to torment the next traveler foolish enough to trust a sail. It is mid-afternoon when you spot the outlines of stone columns and mud brick walls rising above the palm trees. A temple complex sprawling along the bank like a beached crocodile. You paddle closer, bone-tired and battered by wind, and are met not with the glory promised by every childhood story, but by a ruin in slow collapse. Even from the river, you see patches of flaking paint, sun-baked cracks, and a pair of vultures arguing on the roof. Nothing is eternal, not even monuments to the gods. Still, the prospect of a roof and a meal outweighs your skepticism. You pull your leaky boat ashore, greeted by a pair of monks in dusty linen, their heads shaved to show their piety, or perhaps just a practical hatred of lice. They eye you the way a scribe eyes an ink stain, wary, resigned, but mildly curious. You offer a clumsy greeting and mention, as all travelers do, the sacredness of hospitality. The senior monk, who introduces himself as Brother Keeper, snorts but waves you toward the shade. Egyptian temples are kingdoms within kingdoms, bustling with hierarchies more complicated than the river's own currents. Monks scurry about, carrying jars of sour smelling beer, baskets of moldy bread, and lengths of rope that could be for ceremonies, repairs, or the next unfortunate visitor. Statues of gods, once resplendent, now chipped and bird stained, watch over the courtyard with blank indifference. The scent of incense can do nothing against the deeper, older smell of dust, sweat, and goat. You are offered a meal by local standards, a feast, a bowl of lentils, a wedge of stale bread, a cup of sour beer, and, for dessert, a story of warning from Brother Kipper. It is the custom, he explains with the glee of a funeral director, for guests to earn their food with a tale or two. You, being new blood, are pressed for news of the world. You offer your tale, the voyage, the letter, the fishermen, the priests. The monks listen, nod, and take obvious delight in your misfortune. At least you think they are honest about it. Monastic life in Egypt is not, as you discover, a sanctuary for the holy, but often a last refuge for the unlucky, the unwanted, and the irredeemably awkward. Many monks are ex soldiers, failed merchants, or thieves whose luck ran out. Brother Kipper himself confides, between bites, that he once tried to cheat a royal scribe and found spiritual retreat preferable to the consequences. His colleague, Brother Paneb, simply shrugs and says, "Better a life of prayers than a life on the run." In Egypt, apparently, it is sometimes hard to tell the difference. You learn that temples, while nominally devoted to the service of the gods, function mostly as bureaucratic machines obsessed with record keeping and ritual. There are endless lists of offerings, penances, lost sheep, borrowed goats, and unreturned beer jugs. The priests, far from being all powerful, spend most of their time arguing over allocations and cursing the central temple in the capital for underfunding. Local monks often take on the worst jobs, cleaning out the granaries, driving away the jackals, or today, feeding stray travelers. After your meal, the monks offer a brief tour: the half collapsed sanctuary, the library, 3 clay tablets, and a pile of damp papyrus, the goat pen, and the shrine of the nameless martyr, said to grant mercy to those who have truly run out of luck. You linger there, half tempted to add your own name to the list. The stories you hear are a peculiar mix of superstition and gallows humor. One monk describes the fate of a merchant who tried to bribe a priest with counterfeit silver. His ghost now haunts the storage room, rearranging jars. Another tells of a scribe so bored by temple accounts that he left for the desert, returned as a hermit, and was promptly made the temple's treasurer on the theory that only the truly detached could be trusted with the money. The line between piety and punishment, it seems, is as thin as a monk's patience. You spend the afternoon listening, eating, and learning to sweep out the courtyard in exchange for a little extra bread. By evening, you are exhausted and no wiser about the gods, but a bit more forgiving toward humanity's endless appetite for stories and self justification. As dusk falls, Brother Kepper gives you a final warning. The gods may be eternal, but their patience is not. Leave before morning, and do not take anything that breathes or bleeds. You nod, thank the monks, and make your way back to the riverbank. The temple, in the end, is like the Nile itself, generous, indifferent, and always happy to see you go. You push your battered boat into the water under the watchful eyes of the vultures, another meal in your stomach, and another chapter added to your growing collection of cautionary tales. Ahead, the river waits, unchanged, unworried, and ready for whatever comes next. You wake in darkness, shivering, with sweat beating along your brow, despite the early morning chill. For a moment, you blame the sour beer and the monk's dubious lentils, but soon a deeper ache sets in, burrowing behind your eyes and crawling down your limbs. Your skin prickles, your stomach lurches, and a dull pain throbs at the base of your spine. It is official. You are ill, and not the kind of ill that will be cured by another nap or a stern lecture from your mother. The Nile, for all its gifts, is a river of plagues. Ancient stories make it clear. The same waters that feed the land also deliver a menagerie of invisible enemies. Some come from the air, mosquitoes, flies, and other tireless tormentors. Others from the water itself, bearing curses with names older than pyramids. You recall childhood tales of the river's wrath, a catch all phrase for everything from fever and chills to the infamous red urine disease, which, as you now know, is neither rare nor poetic. You force yourself to row, but your arms feel like sacks of sand. The banks of the river blur and spin. Time slows. It is said in Egypt that illness is a visit from a god, or a demon, or perhaps a relative with nothing better to do. Either way, it is not something to be taken lightly. Your memories swirl, the village healer mumbling over bowls of strange smelling herbs, your uncle spitting on wounds to draw out the evil, the old priest promising relief in exchange for a chicken, or, in lean years, a particularly flattering prayer. The Egyptian art of healing is ancient, revered, and terrifying. The famous medical papyri are full of remedies that sound less like science and more like performance art. If you have a headache, smear your head with crocodile fat and recite the name of the moon god 3 times. For stomach troubles, swallow a mixture of honey and powdered mummy. If you are bitten by a snake, find another snake and threaten it with legal action, then drink beer and hope for the best. Despite their reputation as healers, most Egyptian doctors are more likely to cause pain than prevent it. Their medicine chests overflow with mud, clay, lizard tails, and mysterious unguents, all applied with grave ceremony and absolute faith. Your own experience has taught you that half the time, patients recover just to avoid another dose. You pull your boat into a muddy inlet and stagger ashore. The fever is rising, your limbs growing heavy. You search your sack for anything remotely useful: old bread, a strip of linen, a jar with a swallow of sour beer. You do what every Egyptian does in such moments: improvise. You chew the bread, sip the beer, and wrap yourself in your cloak, hoping to sweat out the poison or, failing that, die with as little drama as possible. It is in these moments of misery that you begin to appreciate the ancient Egyptian attitude toward death. Life is hard, the afterlife is complicated, and illness is simply a reminder that both gods and demons are bored. The priests speak of elaborate journeys through the underworld, weighed hearts, and monstrous crocodile headed judges, but most villagers prefer to focus on the here and now: how to keep breathing long enough to finish one more harvest, one more story, one more cup of beer. As your fever worsens, you hallucinate. The river seems to rise, swelling over its banks in silent judgment. Faces swirl in the current: ancestors, priests, ibis, and the ever present crocodile god grinning from beneath the surface. You dream of temples and funerals, endless lists of offerings, and scribes correcting your name on a roll of the dead. You wake with a start, soaked in sweat, and half convinced you have traveled to the afterlife and back. It is morning, gray, sticky, and full of biting flies. Your fever has broken, leaving you weak but, astonishingly, alive. You stagger to the river, wash your face, and curse every god you can remember, from Amun to Sobek. It is a tradition, you tell yourself, as ancient as the pyramids. You are not well, but you are moving. The Nile does not pause for the sick, nor does it reward the brave. You push your battered boat back into the current, each stroke a victory over aches, fever, and despair. You are now, officially, a survivor, an accomplishment that means little to the gods, but everything to you. Egyptian medicine, you realize, is much like the river, unpredictable, occasionally effective, and best endured with low expectations. You row onward, thinking of all the things you survived: crooked monks, river patrols, clever fishermen, and now your own frail body. Somewhere ahead, the Pharaoh waits, surrounded by healers and priests who have never tasted Nile water, never slept in the mud, never begged the gods for a little less suffering. You grin through chapped lips, grateful for another day on the water, however miserable, however uncertain. On the Nile, it is enough. The river narrows as the sun sets, the current twisting between half-sunken sandbanks and forests of reeds. Each bend looks the same as the last. Each patch of water hides its own traps. You paddle onward, half delirious, haunted by fever dreams and the distinct possibility that you are now completely lost. It is at this moment, Just as you are about to surrender your fate to the crocodiles and mud, that you spot an old man perched on a rock, staring at the sky. He is wrapped in a ragged linen robe, his hair sticking out in wild tufts, his feet bare and caked in mud. His boat, a battered thing even more desperate than yours, is tied nearby, leaking in four places and listing at an angle that defies physics. Yet he seems content, whittling a reed flute and humming a song so old that the river itself might have learned it from him. You call out, more out of hope than expectation. The old man looks at you, squints, and waves you over as if he's been expecting you for years. Lost, are you? He says, voice creaking like an ancient door. You admit as much, with a humility that comes only from surviving fever and humiliation. He introduces himself as Hori, a navigator by trade, madman by reputation. He claims to have sailed every branch of the Nile, from the marshes of the delta to the cataracts far to the south. According to Hori, the river is a living maze, a serpent with more tricks than any priest, more patience than any god. You ask if he can help you find the way to the capital. He laughs, a sound so harsh it scares a stork from its perch. The river finds you, not the other way around, he says, but I can teach you how to follow its moods if you have the stomach for it. Navigation in Egypt is equal parts art, science, and superstition. The ancient pilots, those rare, half mythical men who guided royal barges and merchant convoys, were revered, feared, and occasionally sacrificed if a voyage ended poorly. The river changes every season. New sandbanks appear overnight. Channels close and reeds grow in places where none were seen before. Maps are more wishful thinking than reliable reference. Hori explains the basics. Watch the birds. Herons and ibis know the deep channels. The current runs strongest at the outside of bends. The stars will guide you if the clouds allow. He gestures upward, where the sky is just dark enough to reveal a smattering of cold, indifferent lights. See that one? He points to a particularly bright star. That is Sa, soul of Osiris. Keep it to your left at night, and you'll go north, unless the river disagrees. The Egyptians were the world's first astronomers, out of sheer necessity. The rising of Sirius announced the flood. The constellations marked the passage of seasons, and every scribe worth his salt could recite the names of the imperishable stars. You realize, with growing despair, that you remember none of this. Hori, however, takes pity on your ignorance. He draws diagrams in the mud with his toe, tracing the meandering course of the river and marking the points where the spirits get restless and the fish get fat. He tells you the stories behind the navigation, mad pilots who claim to hear the river whisper directions, star readers who steered by patterns nobody else could see, a captain who once sailed by the smell of lotus flowers alone. The flowers, Hori notes, were not native to that part of the river, but nobody questioned his methods. For every famous navigator, there are 100 more who vanished, taken by sandbanks or seduced by mirages of easy passage. Hori insists that every bend hides a lesson, and that the true art of survival is admitting you are always, in some small way, lost. He confesses that he himself got turned around more times than he can count, and that the difference between a fool and a navigator is that the navigator arrives eventually with only half as many regrets. As the night deepens, you share a meal, such as it is, and sit by the water's edge. Hori plays his reed flute, summoning a tune so mournful the stars seem to flicker in sympathy. You ask how he learned all this. He shrugs, mostly by making mistakes. The river remembers everything, even when we forget. By dawn, you are ready to continue. Armed with Hori's dubious wisdom, a rough sketch of the stars, and a new respect for the unpredictability of both nature and old men, you push off. Hori wishes you luck, then adds, if you reach the capital, tell them Hori says the river still wins. You drift into the current, the river's maze a little less intimidating, the future no less uncertain. The Nile is not tamed, only endured, and the best you can hope for is to keep paddling, guided by stars, birds, and the persistent advice of the mad. You paddle onward with Hori's words echoing in your mind. The river still wins, hoping that the madman's advice will see you through. The sky is heavy, streaked with the flat gray of an oncoming storm, and the water runs darker than usual. It is in moments like these that the Nile's indifference reveals itself most clearly. You round a bend, propelled by a deceptive patch of swift current, and suddenly the river widens, split by a series of shallow islands. The water swirls in lazy circles, tracing patterns that have no meaning except danger. You remember, too late, the warnings of every boatman and old wife. Beware the hidden hands of the river. The Nile is never just water. The first sign is a gentle pull, almost pleasant, as if the river is trying to rock you to sleep. The next is a sharper tug, dragging your bow toward a patch of churning foam. You realize, heart pounding, that you have drifted into a whirlpool, the slow, grinding kind that forms where deep water meets hidden sandbanks. It does not look dramatic. There is no theatrical funnel, no monstrous roar, just a slow, implacable spin, drawing everything closer to the center, then down. You paddle hard, sweating and cursing, recalling every charm and prayer ever muttered by desperate travelers. Sobek, Lord of Crocodiles, be lazy today. Isis, Mother of Magic, turn your gaze elsewhere. The river, true to form, ignores you. The boat creaks, the patched hull groaning as the water tries to drag you sideways. You lean all your weight on the paddle, fighting not just the current, but your own panic. The ancient Egyptians cataloged the river's dangers with bureaucratic thoroughness. Whirlpools, sandbanks, sudden drops in depth. They are all marked on papyri with little illustrations and warnings, sometimes written in a scribe's shaky hand. For every place of beauty, there is a place of ruin. The same currents that deliver silt and fish can, without warning, consume boats and men. Local lore holds that certain spots are haunted by the spirits of drowned travelers, and that even seasoned pilots avoid them, preferring to add hours or days to their journeys rather than risk a hungry bend. With luck, or maybe the river's bored mercy, you manage to wrench your boat out of the whirlpool's grip, swinging wide and crashing into a sandbank. It is a jarring, muddy collision, less dignified than you hoped, but preferable to the alternative. You lie in your leaking boat, chest heaving, as the river eddies past, carrying off bits of reed and pride. Sandbanks are another lesson in Nile humility. They shift constantly, appearing and disappearing with the season, never in the same place for long. Ancient navigators sometimes set up markers, poles with scraps of cloth or small idols lashed to the top, to warn of danger, but these too vanish overnight. The river, it seems, likes to keep its secrets fresh. In the capital, the scribes maintain maps full of obsolete warnings and uncharted hazards. To the ordinary traveler, every stretch of river is a new exam. You stagger out, boots sinking into the sticky mud. The sandbank is littered with the ghosts of other journeys: broken pottery, a rotting basket, a length of rope gnawed by something with sharp teeth. You find a moment's grim humor in the idea that every disaster leaves its own offerings to the river gods. As you pull your battered boat free, you remember tales of ships that vanished with all hands, never to be seen again. Some say they are still traveling, ghostly convoys passing in the mist. Others believe they rest at the river's bottom, their cargoes becoming part of the endless silt. Egypt's temples are full of prayers for safe passage, but the truth is that the river's appetite is never sated. It takes what it wants and offers no apologies. Back on the water, you row more cautiously, steering clear of any suspicious swirls. Every shadow beneath the surface is a possible threat. Even the birds seem to avoid these stretches, gliding overhead with a wary silence. There are reasons, you reflect, that boatmen are both respected and quietly pitied. The risks they take are constant, the rewards uncertain, and the river's judgment is final. The greatest navigators are those who know how little they can control. Some wear amulets made from crocodile teeth. Others swear by old songs or the presence of a lucky cat. You decide, will trust to stubbornness and the fact that you have nothing left to lose. The sky clears by late afternoon. You pass another sandbank, its surface decorated with the skeleton of a boat, half buried, its ribs exposed like the bones of a failed ambition. You salute it as you go by, a silent nod to those who tried, lost, and became part of the Nile's vast, unremarked history. Surviving the river, you realize, is not about mastering it. It is about enduring its moods and forgiving its appetite. The Pharaoh's capital draws closer, but the river, as always, has the final word. At last, after days, or was it years, of rowing, scraping, drifting, and surviving, you catch sight of the capital on the horizon. It rises from the haze like a half remembered dream, a jagged silhouette of obelisks, palaces, and temples, all washed in the dust and smoke of too many cooking fires. You stare at it, half in awe, half in dread, as the river bends and slows, unwilling to give up its latest plaything without one last trial. The city's riverbank is nothing like the gentle, empty shores of your village. Here, hundreds of boats jostle for space, grand barges of the nobility, battered traders' rafts, sleek patrol craft, and rafts held together by prayers and wishful thinking. The noise is relentless, a chorus of shouting, laughter, animals braying, and the constant slap of water against wood. Children dart between the legs of sweating laborers, chasing dogs and trouble. The air is thick with the scent of fish, rot, smoke, and humanity. If the gods ever visited the capital, you suspect they would hold their noses and leave. You search for a place to land, finally wedging your boat between a heap of cargo and a pile of empty fish baskets. Before you have even stood up, two boys appear, offering to guard your boat for the price of a copper coin. You have no copper, but a fierce look and a few choice curses from your home dialect send them scurrying for easier prey. You secure your boat with a fraying rope, tuck your letter into your belt, and step into the mud, promptly losing a sandal to the sucking riverbank. Welcome to civilization. Your first impression is that the capital is a city built by, for, and against crowds. Every street, every square, every shaded alley swarms with people. Some are dressed in linen so fine you can see your own exhaustion reflected in it. Others wear little more than hope and a strip of cloth. Beggars squat by the temple gates, scribes argue under awnings, and merchants scream their prices in voices hoarse from years of disappointment. You have been warned in stories and in jokes about the bureaucracy of the capital, but nothing has prepared you for the reality. Queues everywhere, winding like sluggish tributaries. At the river's edge, officials with tablets and seals interrogate new arrivals, jotting down names and destinations with the seriousness of priests at a funeral. You join the slowest, least promising line, your feet already aching. The process is maddening. You explain again and again who you are and why you have come. Nobody is interested in your story, only in your letter's seal and whether it might bring them trouble. You watch as bribes change hands with the subtlety of a street magician. Those who pay move forward. Those who do not are sent to the back or left to contemplate the meaning of patience. You try to look as poor and harmless as possible, which for once is not difficult. Time is a different creature in the capital. Hours pass. You inch forward, surrounded by an ever-changing cast. A merchant cursing the gods for the price of barley, a weeping widow with a petition clutched to her breast, a sullen youth sent by his family to beg forgiveness for an unspecified crime. You listen to their complaints and their boasts, adding your silence to the chorus of minor suffering that fills every corner of the city. At last, you are ushered past a set of stone pillars and into a courtyard shaded by faded banners. Here, the process starts again. More officials, more questions, more waiting. You begin to suspect that the bureaucracy is less a means of keeping order and more a method of keeping everyone too tired to revolt. The scribes at their tables wear expressions of deep boredom, occasionally breaking into arguments over who last borrowed the good reed pen or whose turn it is to fetch water. You are reminded, not for the first time, of the river itself, vast, complicated, slow, and utterly indifferent to your existence. Here, as there, the rules are both ancient and arbitrary. Every official you meet claims to need another seal, another form, another reason to let you pass. You answer, you nod, you wait. You hope you do not accidentally commit an offense worthy of another day in line. As night falls, torches are lit along the temple walls. Somewhere far away, the Pharaoh dines in gold lit halls, oblivious to the tide of desperate messengers, angry merchants, and exhausted officials surging at the gates of his city. You watch as one by one the lines thin. Some are allowed through, others told to come back tomorrow, or next week, or never. You huddle beneath an archway, clutching your letter, wondering if the journey will end here, in the shadow of the palace, within smelling distance of the fishmongers, but still a world away from the Pharaoh himself. You fall asleep with the city's noise rattling in your bones, dreaming of queues and river currents, and the inescapable certainty that every destination is just another stop on an endless journey. Dawn in the capital is a study in exhaustion. The sky glows yellow over a city that never truly sleeps. You wake beneath a colonnade, stiff and filthy, your dreams still full of queues and river mud. The letter to the Pharaoh, now soft and bent from days of handling, feels heavier than ever, as if it contains not just words, but all the suffering and hope of your long journey. The queue to see the Pharaoh's officials is already forming when you stagger into the palace forecourt. Couriers, taxmen, diplomats, weeping widows, foreign traders, and at least 3 goats all jostle for position. The guards eye you with bored suspicion, their spears more props than threats, their faces the blank masks of men who have heard every excuse twice already. You shuffle forward, clutching your letter. At every turn, another scribe questions you, your name, your purpose, your origin, your intentions, and, in a whispered aside, whether you have brought a suitable gift. You have not. You have nothing left to give, except perhaps the sandals you lost in the mud several days ago. You learn that in the palace, progress is measured not by virtue, but by paperwork and bribes. For some, a copper coin changes fate. For others, a well timed compliment to a minor official works wonders. For the rest, like you, there is only waiting and the hope of invisibility. You wonder about the Pharaoh, this living God who rules over every grain of sand and every drop of water. The stories you've heard are contradictory. One day he is a just and wise ruler, the next, a tempest in human form. Some say he reads every petition with care. Others insist he has not touched a scroll in years, delegating all such tedium to his army of advisors. You suspect the truth is somewhere in the middle, though probably closer to indifference. After another round of endless corridors and shaded courtyards, you are finally ushered with a clutch of other supplicants into the great hall. The ceiling vanishes into shadow, the columns rise like petrified forests, and the walls are covered with scenes of conquest, feasting, and gods frowning upon the unlucky. At the far end, upon a low dais, sits the Pharaoh. He is younger than you expected, almost bored, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond the mortal realm. The process of audience is theater more than justice. Supplicants are called one by one, their petitions summarized by a minor scribe. The Pharaoh listens, or appears to, before making a gesture, a nod for approval, a flick of the hand for dismissal, a weary sigh for everything in between. Occasionally, he confers with a counselor who inevitably responds by adding your petition to a growing pile of unresolved complaints. You realize, with cold clarity, that your own message may never reach the man before you. The gears of government grind slowly, if at all. Your turn arrives. You step forward, bow deeply, and present the battered letter. The scribe breaks the seal, glances over the words, and recites the summary in a monotone. You listen, heart pounding, as your village's plea, whatever it may be, drifts out across the marble floor, barely louder than the clatter of sandals and whispered intrigues. The Pharaoh does not look at you. His attention is elsewhere, perhaps on the ceiling's painted gods, perhaps on the banquet to come. Your petition is handed off to another official who adds it to a basket of scrolls and tablets. The scribe nods. The audience moves on. You have become a footnote, an afterthought in a ceremony older than the city itself. You step back, numb. This is what it means to reach the center of the world. Not revelation, not judgment, but a slow, indifferent current that swallows you like the Nile itself. No one cheers, no one congratulates you. A guard gestures for you to leave. You obey, walking back through the echoing corridors, out past the yawning clerks, the hungry dogs, the sun-struck supplicants, and the endless line forming for tomorrow's audience. Outside, the city roars and stinks as before. The river glints in the sun, as old and indifferent as ever. You find a quiet spot on the quay, sit in the dust, and stare at the water. You wonder whether your message will ever be read, whether it will change anything. You wonder if you will ever return home, and whether your home will remember you when you do. A priest passes by, muttering a prayer. A scribe drops his stylus and curses. Two fishermen laugh as they unload a net full of silver fish. The world turns, unchanged. In the end, you understand. The journey was never about the message. It was about surviving the river, the sandbanks, the crocodiles, the monks, the patrols, the healers, the traders, the priests, the officials, and, most of all, the endless, patient machinery of fate. The Pharaoh may never know your name, but the Nile does, and that is enough. You rise, brush the dust from your clothes, and walk back into the city. Somewhere behind you, the river flows on, ancient and unbothered, carrying away the last echoes of your journey until the next messenger arrives clutching another letter, stepping into the same slow, inescapable current.